Um, so I look forward to getting to know all of you, but if we haven't had a chance to have a conversation yet, maybe you're new, maybe you watch the marketing training for new hires, but I am the director of marketing for LaBella Associates. I have been here for about 10 years now, and I am going to take just the next hour and really kind of outline for you some of our marketing programs and initiatives and how the role of the PM plays a role in us executing those. So it's not going to be marketing 101, although we'll start out that way a little bit. But the goal of this presentation is to give you some broad awareness of some of the marketing programs we're doing and how and why PMs need to participate in enabling us to do that. So I'll try to go, I'm going to move like pretty quickly, but welcome comments and questions at any time. I have the chat open separately, so I should be able to see them, or, you know, just take yourself off mute and yell it out. Totally fine. So I like to start, hopefully you guys are seeing my screen. I like to start with a quick poll, which I'm going to launch here for you. Have you ever taken a college level marketing class? Simple yes or no. Go ahead and plug it in. And we'll give it just a couple seconds here to see kind of where we're at with this group. So we're about 85% in, getting up to 90. Give it just another 30 seconds. Okay, so here are the results. Let me see if I can share them. Hopefully you're seeing them. Yeah, so about 88% of you said no. And I love to start this way, simply because one, you should know if you have any question, chances are everybody else does too, because by and large, what we see across the board is in design and engineering curriculums, there is no marketing education. So I bring it up to, you know, set expectations. We're not gonna get to that level of marketing literacy you would get in college today. But if you have a question, feel free to throw it out, because chances are everyone else has it too. So why is it that nobody on this call, who, you know, we all have college degrees, some of us have advanced degrees, haven't ever really talked formally about marketing? Well, I think we can look to some of the history of our professions for the answer to that question. Until the 1970s, the American Institute of Architects actually prohibited all marketing activities. So if you were going to be a licensed architect, you could not knowingly compete on price, you couldn't take out ads, you couldn't do a lot of the activities that are traditionally associated with marketing. And I don't think that engineering had any such restrictions, but they, you know, really took their cue from the sort of professional organizations that a lot of times had a lot of restrictions around these sorts of activities. So when it came to marketing firms and their work, there was very little traditional marketing activities going on. And if you ever seen like Mad Men, the 60s, sort of the birth of branding and advertising and a lot of that stuff, our professions were behind. We didn't participate in any of that. And so that's why I think that you'll see a lot of curriculums still have not caught up and don't provide any marketing education as part of these sort of professional educational journeys. And I'll just tell you guys too, just, you know, this is not me looking down at you. My undergraduate degree is in interior design. And I didn't have any marketing education in that either. It wasn't until after I was practicing for 6 years that I went back and decided to do a master's degree specifically in marketing, because it had been an area of interest for me, but I didn't get any introduction to it at all either in my design curriculum. So how it worked was firms were named like law firms. They kind of took their cues a lot from law firms. That's why you often have last name, and last name associate, right? And, you know, if you couldn't do any traditional marketing activities, this really led to an over-reliance on networking, right? Which is, we still see the, you know, the signs of that today, and that, you know, you still have certain areas where, you know, people will say, oh, that's an old boys club, right? It's all about who you know, and just being in the right place at the right time, which again, the rest of the industry around marketing advertising was getting a lot more sophisticated. Now, to me, the fact that today we're still turning out graduates with no marketing education is problematic for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which is what's the surest way of advancing in a firm? Anyone want to throw it out there? The surest way of advancing is to bring work in, right? Is to bring in new clients, bring in new projects, and yet we're not really giving anyone the tools that they need in order to figure out how to do that really effectively. Our former president, Bob Healy, used to say, you know, there's a certain time when part of your job becomes helping to feed the family, right? And that means that you're bringing projects back to your team for them to work on, right? And, you know, business development is the most traditional path to firm leadership. I'm not going to talk about business development today. It's really not my area. What I'm going to talk about is some of our marketing programs. And the idea behind the marketing programs is that, you know, sort of everybody can contribute to them, right? Because marketing's job is to really make it easy for your business development team to go out and sell work. That when we do our job correctly, it makes those opportunities really obvious and primes them for us to sell to them. So let's talk a little bit about some of the strategies that we use today. First of all, if you've never taken any marketing courses, what you know about marketing is probably a result of being marketed to, right? So you're a consumer, you experience marketing all the time. But one of the things that you probably have realized is that a lot of consumer marketing strategies just don't make sense in our industry, right? We don't run sales. We don't offer, you know, buy one project, get the second one free. We don't do a lot of the traditional marketing tactics that you might experience as a consumer. So where we're talking about marketing, we're talking about a very specific segment of marketing, and that's called marketing of professional services. And we have our own professional society. It's called SMPS, the Society of Marketing for Professional Services. And in this sort of group or segment of marketing, you'll find AEC firms like us. You'll also find accounting and financial firms, law firms, and sort of other consultants. And the reason why we kind of group in with these people is because a lot of our purchasing process looks the same, right? In all of these industries, you can't see the product before you buy it, right? We very rarely design or come up with an engineering solution and then show it to the customer and they pick the consultant based on the one that they like best. Usually they're having to pick who they'd like to work with based on a portfolio of past performance and trying to just assess maybe who it is that they'd like to work with. And it's the same case really for accounting firms, law firms, other types of consultants. These tend to be high risk purchases, right? There could be millions of dollars at stake. They tend to be infrequent purchases. It's not like when you buy a pack of gum every week, right? So there's a lot of the buying process that's in common amongst these industries. And so SMPS develops a lot of resources for marketing these types of things, including, you know, our conference, which is huge. We have a great magazine called Marketer, which is geared at people that have my job, whose job is to market firms like ours. Really great, networking opportunities, workshops, all those kinds of things. And a lot of what you're going to see today will come from SMPS. They do a lot of research on best strategies and practices. And so when I'm telling you something that's my opinion versus something that's, you know, well researched, I'll make that clear to you. But just so you know, there's a lot of resources out there. If this presentation really sparks an interest, we have lots of resources we can share on the topic. So I like to talk about a time that I was a professional services buyer. So I was a customer. And I like to use this example. Back in 2017, we had decided that we were going to rebrand the company. And so I had to decide on which branding consultant we were going to hire. And again, very similar to what our clients face. We had to pick someone to work with. They didn't like all design a logo and then I got to pick which one based on the logo. So I had to kind of go off their past performance. Really high risk decision, right? I had to live with the rebranding probably for the next 10, 20 years, right? High pressure. I had never hired a rebranding consultant before, right? So this sounds like sometimes like our clients might be experiencing some of these same things. And we ultimately, we went through an RFP process and, brought it down to 3 firms. Firm A was local. We had worked with them before. We actually had hired them to do a study because before we decided to rebrand, we were considering doing a brand refresh and just making some other minor changes before we ultimately decided to do the full rebrand. Firm B was also local, and I had a close friend who had actually helped me get into marketing that worked there, someone that I really valued and respected in the industry. And then Firm C was not local, and I had never met anybody there, but they did have somebody on their staff who really specialized in AEC branding and had quite a bit of industry experience. So we're going to do a quick poll, and I want you guys just to take a guess at which firm do you think won the work. 1 second here. Just take a guess. Oh, Heather, it's not letting me launch. Why? Oh, I have to stop sharing that. Sorry, guys. Okay, take a quick poll there. Hopefully that's working for you. Looks like we've got just about everybody in. 92%. I hope Kat and Heather are not voting because they know the answer. Okay. I will share the results with you guys. You guys can see that? Can you give me a quick nod? Can you see it? Yeah, okay. So as you can see, we're pretty clearly divided here. 22% thought firm A, local, did the study. 48% firm B, local, had a relationship with the decision maker, and 30% of you thought firm C, which was not local, but with a market specialization. So the answer here is actually firm C. So you guys, 30% of you, well done. And good job voting, everybody. Let me see if I close that out. Okay. So why was it firm C? Well, there's a lot of industry research that I'm going to share with you now that basically indicates that we're seeing a real shift in terms of the future favoring the specialist. And this was data I actually pulled together before COVID, where we were seeing, that younger decision makers don't mind as much bridging distance with technology. And that's certainly that bar has come down a lot further as we've all sort of gotten a lot of practice doing that. And then we also see generally across the board that Generation X and millennials, which case I was a decision maker in this example, I'm a millennial, do tend to be less relationship driven and more interested in finding specialized experience without regard to the relationship behind it. So Circle S Studio, which was the firm that ended up doing their rebrand, you'll see a couple examples of their posts here. They had this really visible expert. His name was Tim Asmos. He had worked for civil engineering firm. This is pretty much all he does is AEC rebranding. And he was really visible. And even though I had never met him, I was very aware of who he was and what he had to say on the topic. And do you remember this slide, which is the one I showed you that talked about where all the SMPS people are hang out and what they're reading and the things that they're going to? Every piece of content on this slide was something that was authored by Tim. So he was very clearly, right, he knew where his audience was, and he was providing a constant stream of thought leadership to people like me who need rebranding services for AEC firms. So does anyone have any idea what we call it when someone like me calls Tim out of the blue? Any ideas? We call this inbound marketing, right? And when the prospect calls you, instead of you calling the prospect, it's called inbound marketing. Because what happened here was that Tim demonstrated that he understood my business, understood my problems, had interesting things to say about certain solutions, had advice to give, had expertise to share, and that he was going to be able to make my project a success. And he built that level of trust with me without ever meeting me. And so this is the kind of the characteristic of inbound marketing. Outbound marketing tactics are all these things that Tim didn't do. He never e-blasted me, cold called me, never sent me a mailer, never met me at an event, never gave me a brochure, never gave me anything free, no free stuff, right? So that's not to say that inbound marketing is right and outbound marketing is wrong, but that we want to be doing a combination of the tactics, right? Because obviously when inbound marketing works, it's really great because you have somebody coming to you with a need. They already like you. They already kind of like what you have to say. And it's a lot cheaper than some of the outbound strategies. But good marketing strategy is usually a mix of both inbound and outbound techniques. So those are some of the principles of inbound marketing, which we're going to talk a little bit further as we kind of continue on about what this looks like in our industry and in our field. Any questions so far? Don't see anything in the chat. No. Okay. All right. So let's talk about how clients buy, right? Because that's the point of this presentation. So this is what we know about how clients buy our services. There are 4 stages: learning, vetting, discussing, and hiring, right? Sound about right? I think it's kind of common sense, right? But what we historically see is AE firms spend the most amount of their time and money and marketing investment in the discussing phase, because that's where the RFP is, right? And in theory, that makes sense because the RFP is where the opportunities are real. They're probably funded. It's closest to the money as you can get. And so to some degree, that makes sense. But what happens is when we really research it, what we find is this is where clients spend their time during the decision-making process. They spend a substantially amount of more time in the learning and vetting phases. And by the time the RFP comes out, there probably already is a front runner in their own mind. Just like when I was buying our rebranding services, I already kind of had thought that I would want to work with Tim. So it's important to know, good clients research and read. 50% of C-suite, which is CEOs, CFOs, COOs, right? Read industry information for at least an hour a week. And that we know that younger decision makers particularly evaluate recommendations and either accept or reject them based on online research, which means you could be earning a recommendation based on a really good, project management experience that client has had before. But if we're not reaching them during learning and vetting, we may not even know that recommendation was out there if they're not liking what they see during that stage. So I don't think this is anything new. I think if you've been doing this for a while, if you're in front of that client before the RFP comes out, your chances of winning go up a lot. We've known that for years. So this isn't really that new, but what it looks like has changed a little bit. So what are some of the things clients are doing during learning and vetting? Learning, we kind of tend to think is like there's some kind of impetus that is making the client, have some kind of desire to do something. And this could look like a local elected official is hearing a lot about funding. People are asking him about funding and he's trying to figure out, do we qualify for that funding? Maybe you're in a competitive senior living environment and you know that your competitor just got some amenity and you're thinking, oh, do we need to add that amenity now? It could be new regulation, new funding, new competitor analysis, whatever it is. They're sort of thinking like, oh, maybe I need to do something. And so I like to call it learning phase, researching phase. That's probably going to take to their computer. Or it could be, they could be at an industry event. They could be at a training session. They could be doing online research. They could be seeing something in a trade publication. Maybe there's a trend that kind of speaks to them, that kind of catches their eye. They could watch a webinar, join a LinkedIn group. They could be just on social media, right? They could be doing lots of different things. But they're trying to think about, like, do I need to do something here? What action might I take? And then in vetting, they're kind of starting to think about who could help me with this, right? And that might be they more seriously interact with people at trade shows. They may agree to an intro meeting with someone that could help them with that. They may start asking for recommendations, and they might start just researching online. Who could they call, right? So these are the first 2 phases, and we know kind of that this is a really important time, right? This is when when I was doing the rebrand, I read a bunch of blog articles, things to consider when you're doing a rebrand, 5 mistakes to make sure you don't make when you're rebranding, all that kind of stuff. I was doing all that stuff. So I hope that it rings true to you guys, that you can kind of picture your clients doing something similar. And then what happened is you start applying some generational preferences to this, right? So you'll kind of see in green some of the methods that are preferred by boomers, which, starting to retire, but are still, for a long time have been the decision makers. And then some of the preferred method of millennials, Gen X, they're kind of in between. And it's not to say that every millennial prefers to go online first, and there's no boomers that love to go, go on Google, but that there's certain, I would say, tactics here that feel easier depending on your generation and some of the generational preferences that we see. Then we kind of can cross out the tactics, right, that were impossible during COVID, and you can start to see the remaining tactics have become very, very important. And a lot of this relies on digital marketing, making sure we're creating content that can get found online. Again, nothing new, but it's certainly an area where, again, we could be getting a recommendation and learning and vetting phase. And if we don't have the online content to back it up, we could lose that recommendation without ever even knowing it. So this is why this is important. So in order to do learning and vetting really, really well, we have to know who we're trying to talk to, right? Who do we want to attract and where do they go to learn? And this is a great example here that I have up here. This is an article about our new wastewater treatment plant we did in North Carolina, and it actually ran in Water World magazine. And I like to use this as a great example because, I probably could have done a press release, media push, and gotten this article in the Charlotte Business Journal and reached more people. And maybe the project team would have felt really good about it because they would have been, really front and center and everyone would have seen it. But the question that we're actually trying to answer from a marketing standpoint is, to whom is this content really useful? And how likely are they to have a wastewater treatment project, right? And so then you can start to see that actually Water World is a better outlet for us because wastewater treatment plant owners and operators are the ones reading that, and they're the ones likely to see this sort of content and say, oh, I think these people could help me with that. So the important thing to remember about inbound marketing is we're not a consumer brand, right? We're not Nike, we're not Sony, we're not trying to reach everybody, and we can't. We don't have the budget, we don't have the resources, it wouldn't make sense for us to try to reach everyone. So when you're talking with a marketing team member, don't be surprised if the first question we're sort of talking about is, who's the decision maker? Because that's the first question that we have to answer when we want to use this technique. The other thing I would just mention is, as you can see, this is like a great piece of content for our water and wastewater group. Did it do anything for our K-12 team? No, right? So you cannot rely on other people to create your content. Whatever market you're working in, whatever project you're doing has to be promoted for that specific market. So it doesn't count for other markets when we do this the right way and we're really trying to reach certain decision makers. The next piece of content I just like to share is, this is a piece we did with Jenny Johnson out of our waste and recycling group in Richmond. And what's interesting about this piece of content that we created with her is that, it's not about a project at all, right? So don't think you have to wait to have a really remarkable project or a really groundbreaking project. This is an article where it's just Jenny commenting on the state of the industry, and people know that she's an expert and expertise in her market, and that her point of view really has value. She doesn't need a flashy project in order to have her sort of point of view reaching decision makers and having them see her as an expert. So let's talk for a quick second about expertise versus experience. And I promise I won't read you slides for the rest of the time we have together, but I always do read this one because I think it's really important. Our experience, the projects you guys are working on, we have to document that. And that plays a really critical role in the RFP phase, because that's when people are evaluating, can they really do what they say they can, right? So experience is very important, but it's not enough, right? Expertise is what you know how to do. And it's an article like Jenny's where you can start creating a conversation about the prospect and their business and the issues that they're facing, without necessarily having a project, right? So experience is what you've done in the past. It creates reassurance. Expertise is what allows you to open the conversation. So it's the difference between saying, experience is we've done 100 million in K-12 schools, but expertise is we've done so many K-12 schools. I want to talk to you about what the classroom of the future looks like. Do you understand there's a difference there? Both are important. As PMs, we're going to ask you to help us document our experience, but we also need you to go the next level, which is once you get some experience, draw those larger conclusions and look at broader trends and give us some expertise that allows us to open some of these doors through conversation. A great way of thinking about it is showing, not telling, right? Just like that K-12 example. If you really are an expert in K-12, show me, because you can talk about the issues and trends facing K-12. So when we write to show expertise, just a couple things to keep in mind. I hope that you'll all do this for us at some point in your PM careers. But when we usually start with a blog post because it's the most simple. We can turn it into other things. We can shop it to different publications. We can turn it into a speaking engagement. We can turn it into an infographic or video. But it's important to remember when we're doing this kind of conversing with our clients that it's not technical writing. It shouldn't read like a cover letter. It shouldn't read like a technical report, which I know you guys probably all know how to do, flawlessly. It should be easy to read and it should be entertaining. It should sound like a person and not a company. And it's not about us, right? When content marketing really works, it's about, talking about what we have in common, which is the industry, right, in which that we're working and the ways in which we can help them. Anyone have any thoughts on when this doesn't work? Right, it all sounds logical, right? But when does it not work? Anyone want to throw anything out?
Anyone?
You're like, no, sounds great, Beth. Well, I'll tell you why it doesn't work. This doesn't work if it's too promotional. So if it's just a thinly disguised sales pitch, it doesn't work. The conversations have to be authentic. You have to have real expertise that you're sharing. And we have pushed back on content that we've worked with our technical team on before and just saying, it's not deep enough, like that this is too superficial. And then the other way it doesn't work is if nobody reads it, right? So everyone's doing this, like probably if you're ever on LinkedIn, you see people making content all the time, articles here, articles there. There's so much content, nobody can possibly consume it all. So what we have to do is then make sure that our content gets seen. And that's where some of those outbound strategies come into play. How do we make sure that our stuff is being seen? We make sure it's being seen by appearing in a trusted content source that has an established audience. So that's like Water World, right, is an established audience with water and waste professionals. Using a trusted industry group to host our speaking engagement, right? Finding the right trade journal, all that stuff helps people see content. And then, of course, we're more likely to read content when it comes from someone we know. So that's where LinkedIn comes into play. If you guys share an article through that and somebody knows you, they're much more likely to click on it and read it than if they were just to encounter it on Google. Other ways you can get your content to stand out is, you can pair with an influencer. Again, this is just somebody that, is seen as an expert and people trust their opinion. So if you can get them to share something that you've written, it can really add a lot of credibility. And then we can also pay, right? We can use combination of paid advertising to pay for our content to reach the top of search results or enter people's social media feeds, which we have done in a limited capacity. But again, that comes with dollars, right? So there's, it's always a balance between the resources we have and how best to use them. So that's sort of my intro spiel on inbound marketing. Let's talk about the next phase, right? So we've done what we need to do. We're in learning and vetting, and now we're going to get to discussing, which is where we're actually evaluating providers. And let's talk a little bit about what this looks like for clients. Most of the time when people have a decision to make, they end up focusing on points of parity and points of differentiation. So let's use, for example, we're shopping for a car. Maybe you're trying to decide between a couple different models. You will focus on what they have in common. So where do they all sort of check your box, right? So, I definitely want 4-wheel drive, and they all have 4-wheel drive. I definitely want a sunroof. They all have a sunroof. And then you start focusing on points of parity, points of differentiation. Those are points of parity. my must-haves, and then points of differentiation. Where are they different? Maybe you like the upholstery better and the Mazda, maybe you like the headlights better on the Ford, right? And you start kind of thinking through, you know, what meets all my must-haves, and then what are the things that really make me pick one over the other. And most decision making follows this, right? So we can know this research-wise, psychologists have studied it. So, you know, assuming that they're getting a bunch of different RFP responses, they're going to weed some firms out based on their points of parity. So the things that, you know, don't meet their minimum requirements. And then after that, it becomes a differentiation game. The problem with differentiation is this. This is what everybody says, right? Every firm says some variation of this. Our people are great. We're like a family. We're a leader in this. Here's a list of our services. Look how broad it is. Here's a list of our people. Look how great they are. And here's a list of our projects. Aren't they all great? And it becomes very, very difficult for the client to find differentiation between the proposals they receive. And I did this before we did our rebranding, as I actually took some copy from different firms' websites, and I took the firm name out. And I actually challenged our leadership team to figure out which one was off. And believe it or not, they couldn't actually do it, right? Because everybody says the same thing in the same way. We were founded in this year. We have a staff of over so many people. We partner with our clients. We have the resources you need. You know, we're professionals. We're committed to helping our clients improve their mission. You know, we have the experience and knowledge necessary, right? This could be any firm, but I don't care who it is. You can put any name in here and it would be true, right? And so this is very challenging for our clients, right? This is another example. I won't read them all through, but these were mission statements, right? They could have all been our mission statement. So how do we differentiate? And I should mention too, that all the firms submitting on a project are qualified. Firms that aren't qualified usually aren't submitting, and if they have real problems, like they're being sued or whatever, they tend not to last long. So usually most of the people at the table should be at the table. That's not always true, but most of the time it is. So if everyone's qualified, how do we differentiate? Well, this is challenging, right? I would argue that the only way you can meaningfully differentiate in a proposal is you have to either understand their problems better than everybody else, genuinely have better solutions, right? Maybe you have some kind of innovation or you've done something, you know, that other people haven't done before. You have to communicate the benefits of your solutions better, or you have to have stronger proof that your solutions really will solve their problems, right? And the one thing I'll say about this is there is no way you can do that if all you know about the project is what's in the RFP, okay? So if you're hearing about the project for the first time in the RFP and you're just going off what they have, chances are really high that you can't actually do all those things better than everybody else because you don't have enough intelligence about the project or the problem or the people involved to actually do that better than everybody else. It's also really hard to differentiate better than everyone else if all your proposal content is boilerplate, meaning you have a off the books approach and off the books resume and off the books, you know, whatever it is. If you're not customizing the content to the project, the chances of you doing any of those things better than everyone else are virtually nil, right? So these are common mistakes when it comes to preparing proposals. Here comes, I think this is your last quiz, guys. How much does the average proposal cost? Oh, damn it, I showed the answer. Okay, I'm sorry, guys. You don't get to take the quiz. Sorry, I was trying to share the poll and I clicked it. But the answer is 10 grand, okay? You guys, this is a lot of money for an average proposal preparation, right? And that's including, you know, if you get shortlisted, then maybe there's an interview, right? So some are gonna be less and some are gonna be more. But if you take into account the marketing team's time, the PM's time, principal's time, you gotta make a fee, we gotta make a schedule, we gotta customize the approach, it's $10,000, right? So it's a lot of money. And of course, we all have stories of the one that we had no business submitting on and it landed. and that's great and it's fun, but I compare that it's like winning roulette. That doesn't mean you should play roulette every day, right? Like that's still not a good business strategy. So, you know, and it's not fiscally responsible. I know as part of this, you know, PM training, we want to make sure everybody's being fiscally responsible, and going after a proposal where you don't know anything and you don't know the people, it's just not fiscally responsible. So, here's a couple things to keep in mind. If you chase two rabbits, you'll catch neither, right? So keep that in mind. If you have the marketing team working on a pursuit that is sort of ill-founded, you know, it's taking them away from another rabbit that we might have been better positioned to actually go after and win. You know, we have a go, no-go process and decision-making matrix. It's available in the CRM. You're going to see that in the next session. They'll show you how to use it. But that can really help you make good decisions about this, right? You don't have to, you know, be sitting there wondering if this was a good idea or not. We can actually have a quantitative process that helps us with those decisions. And then always talk to your marketing team member about it, because they really will have the sense of like how high or low effort this proposal is, how we might show. They kind of have knowledge of other things we might have chased and won or not won. So, you know, include them in that discussion because they have a lot of insight they can share with you. A lot of the questions that also will come up as we're sort of evaluating whether or not to pursue a project is it wired? And wired means they already know exactly who they want to work with and they're just RFPing it because they have to, they maybe have to by law, or they want the appearance that they're price shopping, but they kind of already know who's got it in the bag. And the answer to that, you know, when I say is, the answer is probably yes, right? So in the example I used for you with the rebrand, it wasn't wired. I mean, it certainly gave all three of those firms a shot and a chance to win our work. But there was a front runner, and it was because that one had done the most work in learning and vetting, right? So I do think, you know, there probably is a front runner. If we haven't been in front of the client, it's probably not us. This is also where political considerations come into play, and I don't know everyone's discipline on here, but you know, certainly some publicly funded projects, there is a political process that plays into, you know, who feels like they're due or who needs to be rewarded and that kind of thing. And it's always worth having these sorts of discussions before we decide to commit to doing the proposal. Any questions so far? No? Am I going too fast? Sorry if I talked too fast. Okay. The proposal pile. So we submit a proposal. What do we know about the psychology behind clients? Well, if you have 40 100-page books to read, what would your first thing be? The answer is figure out which one of those books you don't have to read, right? So the first thing a client always does is look for a reason to DQ. Look who they can throw out and not have to spend as much time on. So when we're preparing a proposal response, we have to follow the RFP to the letter in terms of requirements, because they will take any opportunity to shorten their proposal stack. So that means we got to do the materials in the order they're requested, make sure that all the required elements are easy to find. We need to observe any page limits. I know I've talked to some PMs before, they think that that's optional. They're really not. There's a reason why they're asking for them. And then of course, the one thing that we would bring up is the proposal process is deadline driven. It's quick, it's hard. We have to fit it in between all the other things we have to do. But if you can be thrown out for a minor mistake, make sure that you're leaving time for QA/QC. Remember, there's $10,000 at stake. So don't throw it away because you didn't leave time for anyone to do a quick check over it before it went out the door. A couple other quick slides, and you guys, I have about 8 more slides, so we're in the home stretch. What makes a good proposal? Don't just regurgitate the RFP. Chances are the reviewer wrote the RFP and doesn't need you to regurgitate their words back to them. You want to avoid jargon. So this is where the marketing team can come into play. They're really good at sort of being that layperson if you start kind of going into too many industry or technical terms. They don't want to read a lot of fluff. It doesn't show that you value their time or that you were thoughtful and concise in how you put the proposal together. This is quote on here. I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have time. It actually takes more time and energy to write something that's concise and powerful than it does to fill and like sort of run on and ramble, right? So keep in mind, concise language is really powerful, and the more we can personalize it to the prospect, the more likely they are to feel that we are the ones to help them. So personalization is very important. The other thing I would just mention is that they're not going to read every word. We know this. And so we use a lot of captions in our templates and our proposals, and that's specifically for we can pick up the skimmer, highlight certain passages. We use a lot of pull quotes, and that's really just to make sure that the messages we want to convey are the ones that they're seeing and they don't have to search for them. Other things to keep in mind in preparing a proposal: there's no grand finale, right? There's no guarantee that they have to read it from cover to cover. So that cover letter is your one-page case for why we should do the work. It doesn't go in the back. There isn't like a big conclusion and this is where we get to it. It's the front page cover letter. This is why we're the ones to do the job. So spend as much time as you can on that cover letter because it's really important. So when people review proposals, it's important to remember that fundamentally clients make decisions based on risk, right? So they're going to pick somebody to do this project. Maybe it's a $50 million bridge and it's the biggest project they'll ever do in their career. You know, maybe it's something small, but it has to be done by June because that's when campus is opening. Whatever it is, there's some degree of risk for the person picking you. And ideally, we want to convey that we're the less risky choice, right? And that could be because we have the best track record or we have the most knowledge or whatever it is. We have to know what the risk looks like to the client. What are the risks to hiring us? What makes them uneasy about us versus somebody else? Where's their pain point, right? For me, like doing the rebrand, lots of pain points there, right? We're a very diverse firm. I had to make sure I had somebody that wasn't going to come up with something that made a lot of sense for architecture, but no sense for environmental. A lot of stakeholders, right? Longevity. We were trying to get our rebrand done in time for our 40th anniversary, so I had time pressure pain, right? So think about what is the client's pain? What are the risks that they're worried about? Testimonials, Brittany's going to talk about them in your next session, are really important. All of us have gotten used to buying things online and reading reviews, and those reviews make us feel more confident in making our purchase. So testimonials are really, really important. But ultimately, what we're trying to convey in the proposal is expertise. We have the knowledge, empathy, we can understand your pain, and we know what matters to you. Authenticity, we're not blowing smoke up your ass. We're genuine that we want to help you and be a part of this team. And then passion, right? That we want this job. I know that one seems like kind of obvious, but how busy is everyone on this call, right? So you got to make sure it's coming through that you actually do want this job. You don't just think that you should win it. And then let's talk about interviews. This is the same 4 things that are the key to interviews too. Expertise, empathy, authenticity, and passion. Unfortunately, the only way you can know that in an interview setting that this is coming across is to actually practice in front of someone that will give you that feedback. And I talk to a lot of people. Everybody hates practicing for interviews. It's awkward, it's stupid. But I know of no sport where you can take 4 or 5 people, throw them out to do something, and have them be successful without practice, right? I like to view like interviews, you got 4 or 5 people, that's a basketball team. Who's running point? Who's taking the 3-pointer? Who's on the line when there's a free throw? You got to know the answers to those questions. Also, I'm a big college basketball person. So, but I do think, it's awkward to practice, right? But it's the only way to do it. It's the only way to make it be successful. And remember, there's $10,000 on the line. Don't fumble it now by not practicing. Sometimes we get asked what to do if, the client hasn't been clear on what the interview should look like what they haven't set questions. They don't, we have 45 minutes. What are we doing here? So this is what I usually recommend if there's no, if the client hasn't made clear what they want to hear about in the interview. The first is to focus on issues. what are the essential challenges or problems? So I'll use a K-12 example here. The project must be complete before school starts. That's their hottest button. It's got to be done by September. Features, what do we have that will solve that problem? Well, we're big firms, we have lots of manpower. We have SED relationships, we have in-house environmental. Benefits, well, why do those features matter? Well, we won't be delayed when we find asbestos because we have in-house environmental. We can create a project schedule that allows for SED review. That might shorten our design time, but we won't lose quality because we have enough people. That's tying a feature to a benefit. If being full service doesn't provide any meaningful benefit, don't spend 10 minutes in the interview talking about being full service, right? People do that all the time because it's important to LaBella, but is it important to them? Does it provide a meaningful benefit? And then the last thing you want to finish is proof. Here's evidence of our claims. Here's a couple projects that we did on an even shorter time frame that all turned out great, right? So this is issues, features, benefits, proof. Why is Harry Potter on this slide? Well, because this is storytelling 101, right? So you want to go through and identify a couple key win themes. Like, for example, this particular K-12 example, there may be others. For a big project, you might have 2 or 3 of these sort of themes. And then you're going to go in and you're going to tell the story of why we're the ones to do this and weave them all together. Last slide, guys. So what happens when we lose? We did all that, we didn't bring it home. I think I can't emphasize enough how important it is to do a debrief. We found not having the PM do the debrief is really important. It's a lot easier to give people constructive feedback when it's not to your face. So a lot of times that's somebody from the marketing team, but we can talk about it if it makes sense for one of you guys to do it. If you get any feedback on where we fell on fee, that's super helpful because you can help other people figure out where the market is and what people are charging, and it just gives us business intelligence. We want to leverage that. So whatever you learn following a loss, make sure you're putting it into CRM because you never know who might be proposing to that client next. And having any data point is going to help them make a better decision and maybe win it the next time. And then a lot of times we get asked, can you turn a no into an opening for other opportunities? And the answer is maybe. You know, if the proposal was number 2 or 3, then yeah, they might be open to further conversation about another project they might have coming up. If the proposal was 15 or 16, they're probably going to be like less interested in doing that. So again, that's why we don't encourage going after low chance proposals, because then the likelihood that we're number 15 and 16 is a lot greater than probably the likelihood we were 2 or 3. So that's it. That's all I'm going to cover today. This is sort of the beginning of what we're doing in marketing and why we think these tactics have merit and make sense as PMs. You know, you'll work with us on proposals. We'll ask for your help documenting work that you've done. And we're always looking for people to help with that learning and vetting phase. Bring us those ideas on the topics, articles that you think might reach your prospects in that early stage. In the next session, Brittany's going to talk a little bit about client experience, which is how you deliver our brand throughout the course of a project and make sure that the clients really engage with the brand. And then Chris Lapel, I believe, is going to take you through the actual CRM. So how do you set up a project? How do you log pertinent information? How do you do some of these things to the benefit of others? So this is just, you know, just kickoff. I'd be happy to take any questions about anything really. But if not, I thank you for listening. No one has any questions. Okay.
So I have a question. So when a proposal is declined, what does LaBella do? Or let me say this: if LaBella doesn't win a proposal, what's the next step for LaBella?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple answers there. One would be an assessment of the client. So do we have an existing relationship? Was this our first time proposing? One of the things I'll quickly mention is at the end of every proposal, once we get an answer, win or loss, we do send the client a survey, and we ask them to evaluate our proposal compared to others they received on a number of factors, including how personalized it was, where we fell on fee, what interaction did they have with the project team prior to submitting. And we sort of aggregate that feedback based on, we're looking for trends, right? Oh, we're consistently higher in this area, or, people consistently say they hate our resume design, which they don't. But, we're looking for things like that that we can apply broadly. But then we also give the client that particular opportunity to check a box to say if they're interested in talking further. If they're interested in talking further, we will certainly set up a one-on-one, usually with our client experience manager or somebody a little bit more removed from the proposal, and we'll take any feedback that they'll give us and share that with the project team. Obviously, if it's a client where we have an ongoing relationship with and we expect it to win, our response looks a little bit different than when it's a new client and we're, building a relationship and understanding that we're, trying to figure out where we can fit in terms of their needs and what they value. So it looks a little bit different, but yes, everybody does get a survey, and when they do take it, which they don't all take it, it's optional. We have found that we can get some insight into their thought process. We asked them to rank what was most important to them, whether it was fee, whether it was approach, whether it was teaming. And then we share that feedback with the PM as we get it.
So does anyone from LaBella follow through with the decision maker? Because based on my experience, I came from the technical sales area.
Yeah.
The decision maker is not really the purchasing department, right? It goes through a technical person, it goes through a review of many people. Typically, there is a decision maker that, based on my experience, we follow through. And it's not just a survey, it's calling that person and building that relationship. Because like you mentioned earlier, is there's a lot of emails nowadays, there's a lot of advertisement, there's a lot of, so acknowledging that we have lost a bid. This is just based on my experience. I can, if you want me to be quiet, I can be quiet. If you want me to talk, I can talk. So that would be one thing. Regarding
Right.
differentiation, I like to use real life examples. And I remember we're bidding millions of dollars. I was with the company for 16 years and we did automation technology there. And our bid, for example, did not include field service support, how diversified the field service department was. So part of the differentiation is to play on your strength, meaning what is it that LaBella has that other people don't have? The experience, like you mentioned, and other things, but the differentiation is very, very critical. And so just that was a prime example that the competitor included in his bid field service. We had a larger field service department, but because we were number one, we got complacent. We didn't include it in our bid, and that cost us over $40 million in business. So just a real life example,
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's tricky about these presentations is a lot of the stuff really varies quite a bit by market, right? So in your first example, there are organizations we work with that are complex, and right, the purchasing department and the decision maker may not be the same. But then in a lot of markets we work in, they are. And so when it comes to sort of like that follow-up, we try to keep it, I think a little bit loose in terms of working with you guys to figure out, well, what is the right strategy here? Certainly in a organization where there were multiple decision makers in various parts of the organization, it requires a different approach than when we're submitting on K-12 and, the decision maker is the superintendent and they were also the one that read the proposal, right? So I think that varies quite a bit. And then, yeah, I think, it makes a great example, having competitor intelligence is really important too, and super helpful And again, that's something that we ask people to log in that CRM. If you hear something about somebody over at, whoever you're competing with, HDR or whoever, about something they did or the way that they won, keeping that competitor intelligence can be really helpful in terms of trying to figure out how to differentiate. And we find that a lot of times we're going up against a firm that isn't full service, but we are. And again, that's where those features and benefits come into play. We have to make sure that that is actually something that matters to the client and that they would value. And it's our job to kind of make them understand why they should value that. So I think, yeah, adding competitor intelligence, you guys are the guys out in front, right? Guys and girls, you're the ones that are, you're seeing your competitor at a pre-proposal walkthrough, who's there, you hear what, if there's a walkthrough ahead of time, what they're mentioning there. And the more you can bring that back to the marketing team, the more we can help you create the messages that are going to speak to that. Great comments. Anyone have anything else they want to add? All right.
Beth, sorry, this is Jake. I guess I had a question or comment. Just in regards to kind of the go no goes and I guess going after some work. I guess maybe twofold. Like maybe it's an area where we want to grow and develop, but may not have the actual resources to spend on a lot of the work. Or, if I guess coming down to if we have no business bidding on the work, but it's an area we want to develop. At a certain point, you need the work to justify growth and getting new employees and that sort of thing. But then on the other hand, without those employees, can you justify going after the work and kind of from, I guess, the marketing standpoint and folks wanting to promote that as part of the business and an area that we can assist in. I don't know. I got just kind of wondering from the PM's perspective, right, is, well, maybe we don't have any business going after that, or if we do win it, is that going to put current employees kind of in a lurch trying to meet the demands of this project or these projects? And I guess I don't know, do you have any insight on that or just kind of during that go, no go?
I do.
Discussion, like how do we?
I definitely do. So I think there's a couple of things I would say about that. One is there's a difference between a strategic target and a project that we don't really have any business going after or winning, right? Because when we say don't go after something you're totally not positioned for, that doesn't mean don't continue with that client as a BD prospect. It means take that 10 grand you would have spent on the proposal and do something else, right? Do a targeted campaign towards them, whatever, make it so that we're better positioned to ultimately win work, right? So we're not saying don't ever set your target or your sights, right, at a client that, we don't have any experience with or whatever. It's just blindly answering an RFP is probably not the best tactic to do so. But, I've heard some of the PSMJ and some people will say, if it's a strategic client, like someone that we've got our sights set on, we really want to work with them, it's an important part of what we're trying to build here, then your default mode should be go, and it switches to no go depending on other factors. And that if it's not a strategic client, meaning it doesn't fit our vision, it's not part of our strategic plan, it's not really going to check a lot of boxes for us, then your default mode should be no-go, and you're really going to switch it to go with compelling evidence to the other way around. So I do think it's not to say, we're not trying to say never make a leap, because you're right, like at some point you have to make a leap, at some point you have to win the work and then get the staff, and LaBella has a really strong history of doing that. It's just, I think we're trying to say, don't make responding to an RFP the way that you try to get your foot in the door, because you would be better off doing some inbound strategies, trying to set up a meet and greet, maybe do a lunch and learn. You know, like there's a lot of things we could do for the effort of preparing a proposal that would better position you to make that leap than just answering the RFP because it's there. So I think it's a mix, right? It's you know, setting your sights, and yes, you will occasionally take a leap. Yes, we will occasionally propose when we're not perfectly positioned. And don't make, you know, perfection be the enemy of progress. But we also just don't want people to be irresponsible, because we've encountered that too.
Yeah, no, and Chris, like Beth, that was awesome. And like Beth mentioned, Chris is going to be going over some of this, and when she goes over the CRM and the go process, and the idea is that we're putting our proposal energy and our resources into efforts where we think it's reasonable, where we're going to get the work for good clients, good projects, or strategic clients or strategic tasks or phases for an existing project. And chances are, if you are, we don't want to go after every opportunity. We have too much work to do. We want to make good choices. And if you are unsure, that's when you speak with your manager or your division director, because they're the ones who are charged with figuring out, like, for their, you know, in the marketing coordinator for whoever whatever your group is. And they're the ones who know, like, what are the strategic initiatives this year for that group. And they'll be able to provide you guidance on, does this make sense or does it not make sense?
Yeah, and just to give you guys some context in terms of facts and data, because I think that can be helpful. Like on average, like a good win rate is about between 35 and 40%. So just keep in mind, if you're doing it right, you're still going to lose 6 out of 10 proposals probably that you put together. So that's why we're saying, like, don't do the one where it's like going to be, you know, 1 out of 250 chance, you know, because already we lose a lot, right? And that's a good win rate as 35 to 40%. So you know, you can be too cautious. I would argue if your win rate is 80%, then you're being too cautious.
Okay, I would say that doesn't sound like
leaving a lot on the table then, right? Like,
yeah, I know we're with waste and recycling. A lot of our clients and projects they're long term. I mean, I've got clients that we've had as clients for 30 years. But you know, some of this breaking into new territories, breaking into new service lines, that sort of thing. It gets a little more iffy in certain scenarios. And then I guess you kind of touched on it, Beth, too, was you know, some of the projects maybe we're doing menial stuff for peanuts because it was kind of an inroad to a strategic client that maybe hasn't panned out like we hoped. And it's like, well, we're still doing this one little task for $5,000 a year. Like, you know, at what point is that not worth the effort that's going into it on the PM side?
Right? Like you say, okay, look, we were already 5,000 in. Let's take them. Let's do a couple things and see if we can nurture this to the next step, right? Yeah. And the answer isn't always pull back. It could be, we are going to put some resources at it. It's just going to be different resources. We're going to try a different tact, other than, you know, just responding to proposals. So. All
right. Well, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Beth. That was awesome. I'm sure everybody learned something new. If there are any questions following this meeting today, you know, feel free to email the presenter or myself or Sue or Mike, or just let us know. We'll be happy to answer them for you. We are, just so you are aware, we are also issuing a survey as part of this project management training program. So just so you know, that will be forthcoming, because we're interested in getting feedback from everybody on what works, what doesn't work, suggestions to improve, etc. So because we want to be in the continuous improvement vein here. So Sue, Mike, Heather, do you have anything else?
No.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.